Sophia had always been good at reading people, a skill that kept you alive when you had nowhere to sleep and no one to trust. But the woman she'd pulled from the rubble defied every survival instinct screaming in her head. Valentina Cruz sat propped against a chunk of broken masonry, pressing Sophia's torn shirt against a gash on her forehead that painted red streaks down her dirt-caked face. Her arms were a canvas of ink, serpents and skulls and numbers that Sophia couldn't decode, but it was her eyes that made Sophia's stomach clench with unease. They darted constantly, scanning the devastated plaza like a trapped animal calculating escape routes. "Como te llamas?" Valentina asked, her voice hoarse from screaming beneath the debris. "Sophia." She handed over another precious sip from her water bottle, watching as the woman drank like someone who'd been buried in a desert instead of under a church. "What happened to you?" The question hung between them like smoke. Valentina's laugh was bitter, almost musical. "Sometimes helping the wrong people gets you planted in the ground, Nina." Sophia understood betrayal. 3 months ago, she'd been Sophia Restrepo, the girl who'd skipped 2 grades and tutored high schoolers in calculus. Her parents had called her their little professor, their ticket to a better life. Then Hurricane Maria had swallowed their house in Catano whole, and Sophia became just another orphan, picking through the bones of civilization. The phone in Valentina's pocket had been buzzing since Sophia freed her, an electronic heartbeat that made the woman flinch each time. She'd pulled it out twice, stared at the screen, then shoved it back without answering. "You should get to a hospital," Sophia said, eyeing the dark stain spreading across Valentina's shirt. "That looks deep." "No hospitals." The words came out sharp, final. No police, no shelters. Valentina struggled to her feet, swaying like a palm tree in wind. "You did enough, Sophia, more than enough. Now you need to forget you saw me." But Sophia had learned something else about survival. Sometimes running from people was exactly the wrong move. She'd tried it with the other street kids who'd wanted to recruit her into their pack of thieves. Hiding only made them more interested. Standing her ground and proving she could be useful had kept her alive. "Where are you going to go?" Sophia gestured at the apocalyptic landscape around them. "Half the island doesn't have power. The other half is underwater." Valentina followed her gaze across the plaza. Humacao looked like God had picked it up and shaken it until everything broke. Cars hung from power lines like Christmas ornaments. A school bus had somehow ended up on the roof of a pharmacy. Bodies still emerged from the rubble daily, and the living moved through it all like zombies, searching for pieces of their former lives. "I've been in worse places," Valentina said, but Sophia caught the uncertainty flickering across her features. The satellite phone buzzed again. This time, Valentina answered. "Que quiere?" she snapped into the device. Sophia couldn't understand the rapid Spanish that erupted from the speaker, but she recognized fury when she heard it. Valentina's face went pale beneath the grime and dried blood. "No sé de qué estás hablando," Valentina said, but her voice cracked. "No hey video." Video. Sophia's blood went cold. That tourist who'd been documenting the hurricane damage, the one with the expensive camera who'd been filming everything, he'd been here when she'd pulled Valentina from the rubble, recording their interaction with the enthusiasm of someone who'd stumbled onto a human interest story. The voice on the phone grew louder, more aggressive. Sophia caught fragments. 7,000, every island, both of you. Valentina ended the call and stared at the device like it had grown fangs. "What video?" Sophia demanded. "Some pendejo posted us online. You helping me?" Valentina met Sophia's eyes, and for the first time she looked genuinely afraid. "It's everywhere now. Facebook, Twitter, the news." Sophia's mind raced through implications. She'd spent 3 months invisible, a ghost moving through the disaster zones, taking what she needed to survive, but never drawing attention. Invisible meant safe. Viral videos meant the opposite. "So people know you're alive," she said. "Is that bad?" Valentina's laugh held no humor. "For both of us? Yes, Nina, very bad." The satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. Valentina read it, and whatever color remained in her face drained away entirely. "We need to move, now." She grabbed Sophia's arm with surprising strength. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" Valentina was already limping toward the edge of the plaza, pulling Sophia with her. "Everyone." In the distance, Sophia heard the rumble of engines, too many engines, moving with purpose through the broken streets of Humacao. Her simple act of mercy was about to become the most dangerous decision of her young life. The engines grew louder, but Sophia knew these streets better than anyone hunting them. She pulled ahead of Valentina, leading them down an alley that had been her home for the past week, a narrow space between two collapsed apartment buildings that created a hidden tunnel invisible from the main roads. "Here," she whispered, guiding Valentina behind an overturned delivery truck that blocked the entrance. "They can't see us." They crouched in the shadows as motorcycles roared past the alley mouth, 6, maybe 7 bikes moving in formation. Sophia had seen enough gang activity in San Juan to recognize a search pattern when she saw one. Valentina pressed her back against the truck's rusted undercarriage, breathing hard. "How did you know about this place?" "I know all the places." Sophia kept her voice low, professional. This was her territory, her expertise. 3 months of staying hidden teaches you things. When the engine noise faded, Sophia led them deeper into her world. She'd carved out a life in the spaces between destruction, places where adults didn't think to look because they couldn't imagine anyone surviving there. Her current shelter was the partially collapsed second floor of what used to be a pharmacy, accessible only by climbing through a hole in the wall that required Sophia's small frame and precise knowledge of which floor beams would hold weight. "You live here?" Valentina stared at Sophia's carefully organized survival setup. Water bottles arranged by fullness, canned goods stacked by expiration date, clothes hung on makeshift lines strung between exposed rebar. A solar charger she'd salvaged powered a small radio that crackled with emergency broadcasts. Medical supplies, antibiotics, bandages, pain relievers filled a repurposed tackle box. "It's temporary," Sophia said, the lie coming easily. Everything was temporary now, but it's safe. She began treating Valentina's wounds with practiced efficiency, cleaning cuts with precious bottled water and applying butterfly bandages she'd learned to make from YouTube videos before the internet died. These were skills that kept her valuable to other survivors, the reason they shared food instead of driving her away. "Where did you learn this?" Valentina asked as Sophia wrapped her ribs. "My mom was a nurse before." Sophia's hands never paused, but something tightened in her chest. "I paid attention when she worked." Before, such a small word for the dividing line that split her life into 2 incompatible halves. Before, when Sophia Restrepo had been someone's daughter, someone's student, someone with a future that stretched beyond finding her next meal. Before, when her biggest worry was whether she'd graduate high school at 14 or 15. The radio crackled with an update about federal aid distribution points. Sophia automatically catalogued the information. Which locations had the shortest lines? Which ones actually had supplies left by the time she could get there? These calculations had become her new mathematics, more vital than any calculus she'd once mastered. "You have family?" Valentina's question was carefully casual. "Someone looking for you?" Sophia's hands stilled for a moment. No. The truth was more complicated. Somewhere in Florida, her Aunt Carmen probably still called the Red Cross daily, searching for any trace of her missing niece. Sophia had seen her own face on missing person flyers posted around the refugee centers, but Carmen lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 4 kids of her own, surviving on food stamps and cleaning office buildings at night. Adding a traumatized 12-year-old to that equation wasn't rescue. It was just a different kind of disaster. "The people you're running from," Sophia said, changing the subject as she secured the bandage. "They're the ones who buried you." Valentina's expression went carefully neutral. "Something like that. And now they want you back? They want me dead." Valentina met Sophia's eyes. "And anyone who helped me." The words hung in the air like smoke from the fires that still burned across the island. Sophia continued her work, processing this information with the same methodical calm she'd applied to everything since the storm. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. But underneath that survival mode efficiency, something else stirred. For 3 months, Sophia had existed in a world where human connections were transactions, food for medical help, information for shelter, skills for protection, simple exchanges between people who'd lost everything except their ability to keep breathing. Pulling Valentina from the rubble hadn't been a transaction. It had been something else, something she'd almost forgotten existed. An impulse that came from the version of herself who'd believed people helped each other simply because they could. That girl, the one who'd given water to a dangerous stranger without calculating the cost, was going to get them both killed. The radio suddenly crackled with an emergency bulletin. Authorities advise residents of eastern Puerto Rico to report any suspicious activity to local law enforcement. Armed individuals believed to be searching for persons of interest in connection with mainland criminal activities. Sophia turned the volume down, but the damage was done. The ordinary world she'd built from hurricane debris was already crumbling around them. Outside, new engines approached. Sophia's blood turned to ice water in her veins. These engines sounded different, heavier, more deliberate. Not the quick reconnaissance runs they'd heard before, but something that meant business. "How many?" Valentina whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her waistband, where Sophia now noticed the outline of a concealed weapon. Sophia pressed herself against the wall and peered through a crack in the pharmacy's foundation. What she saw made her stomach drop through the floor. 8 black SUVs formed a perimeter around the plaza, their occupants spreading out with military precision. These weren't local gang members fumbling through unfamiliar territory. These were professionals who'd done this before. Too many, Sophia breathed. The men, and they were all men, Sophia noted, moved like a coordinated unit, checking buildings systematically. They wore civilian clothes but carried themselves with an authority that made Sophia's survival instincts scream. One of them held up a tablet, showing what looked like a still frame from a video. Her video. The moment she'd handed Valentina that water bottle, frozen forever on a screen that had somehow traveled around the world and back to destroy them both. "We have to run," Sophia said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late. The search pattern was tightening, building by building, and her carefully constructed hideout was about to become a trap. Valentina struggled to her feet, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandaged ribs. Where? That was the question that shattered Sophia's world. For 3 months, she'd always had an answer to that question. Always had 3 escape routes planned, always knew which abandoned building to hit next, which disaster zone offered the best salvage opportunities. Her knowledge of Humacau's post-hurricane geography was better than any map. But maps didn't account for 8 SUVs full of people who wanted you dead. "I don't know," Sophia admitted, and the words tasted like failure. Below them, voices carried through the rubble-strewn streets. They were speaking Spanish, but not the familiar Puerto Rican dialect Sophia had grown up with. This was something harder, flatter, Central American accents she'd heard in news reports about gangs and violence that seemed impossibly distant from her old life in the suburbs. That violence wasn't distant anymore. It was 30 feet away and closing fast. There, Valentina pointed toward the back wall of their shelter, where Sophia had noticed but never explored a gap in the foundation that led to the adjacent building. "Can we get through?" Sophia studied the opening. It would be tight, especially for someone Valentina's size, and she had no idea what waited on the other side. But the alternative was staying put while trained killers searched every inch of their current location. "Maybe," Sophia said, "but we'd be going in blind. Better than staying here to get shot." Outside, the voices grew closer. Sophia caught fragments of conversation, someone giving orders about checking upper floors, about the girl who'd been seen helping their target. The way they said girl made it clear they didn't plan on leaving witnesses. Sophia felt something crack inside her chest. Not fear exactly, but a fundamental shift in how she saw her situation. For 3 months, she'd been playing a game with rules she understood. Stay hidden, stay useful, stay alive. Simple equations with predictable outcomes. But this wasn't that game anymore. This was something else entirely, something where the rules had been written by people who buried women alive and hunted children through disaster zones. People who saw a 12-year-old's act of kindness as a problem to be eliminated. "The money they think you stole," Sophia said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Is it real?" Valentina's eyes sharpened. "Why?" "Because if it's real, then you really were doing something worth getting buried for. And if they're willing to bring this many people to hunt us down," Sophia gestured toward the sound of boots on broken concrete, "then maybe whatever you were doing is worth more than just staying alive." For the first time since Sophia had pulled her from the rubble, Valentina looked at her like she was seeing something unexpected, something more than just a resourceful street kid who'd stumbled into the wrong situation. "You don't know what you're talking about, Nina." "Maybe not," Sophia said, "but I know what it feels like when someone decides you don't matter enough to keep alive." The engines outside shut off one by one, replaced by the crunch of footsteps and barked orders. Sophia realized she was standing at a crossroads that would define whatever remained of her life. She could try to surrender, claim she'd helped Valentina without knowing who she was, hope these men had enough mercy to let a child live. Or she could choose the gap in the wall, the unknown darkness beyond, and whatever impossible mission had gotten Valentina buried in the first place. "Tell me about the money," Sophia said. Outside, someone kicked in the pharmacy's front door. Valentina's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, the only sounds were heavy boots methodically destroying what remained of the pharmacy below them, each footstep like a countdown timer, marking the seconds they had left. $3 million, Valentina whispered finally. Payment for a shipment of girls, children mostly, ages 8 to 15. Sophia's stomach lurched, but she kept her expression steady. 3 months of survival had taught her to process horror without falling apart. "And you took it?" "I was supposed to deliver it to the buyers in Miami." Valentina's voice carried a weight that seemed to press against Sophia's chest. "Instead, I gave it to a shelter in Honduras, a place that helps kids escape situations like—" She gestured vaguely at the air between them, as if the words were too heavy to speak aloud. Below, someone barked orders in rapid Spanish. Sophia caught enough to understand they were splitting up, checking every floor. She had maybe 2 minutes before those boots reached the second level. "So you saved kids," Sophia said. "I tried to save kids. Now those same kids are probably dead because my people found the shelter 3 days later." Valentina's laugh was bitter, broken. "And I got buried alive for stealing money that didn't even help anyone." Sophia stared at her, processing this information with the same methodical calm she'd learned to apply to everything, but something underneath that survival mode efficiency was shifting, changing shape like smoke in wind. For 3 months, every decision had been about Sophia alone. What she needed to eat, where she needed to sleep, how she needed to disappear to stay alive another day. The world had become very small, very simple, very selfish. It had to be. Caring about anything beyond her immediate survival was a luxury that could get her killed. But now, crouched in the ruins of a pharmacy, with armed killers searching for them floor by floor, Sophia found herself thinking about 8-year-old girls in Honduras. Children who might have been saved if Valentina's plan had worked. Children who were probably dead now because it hadn't. "The gap," she said suddenly, pointing toward the foundation opening. "I don't know where it goes." Valentina followed her gaze. Could be another building. Could be a dead end. Could be a 30-foot drop into a basement full of broken glass. Yeah. They both stared at the jagged opening in the wall. Sophia could hear voices directly below them now, close enough to make out individual words. Someone was asking about structural damage, whether the upper floors would support weight. "I should surrender," Sophia said, testing the words aloud. "Tell them I didn't know who you were, that I just saw someone hurt and tried to help." Valentina nodded slowly. "Smart girl. That's your best chance." Except they brought 8 SUVs to hunt down a 12-year-old who shared a water bottle. That doesn't sound like people who ask a lot of questions before they shoot. "No," Valentina agreed. "It doesn't." Sophia closed her eyes, trying to imagine walking down those stairs with her hands up, trying to explain to armed men that she was nobody important, just a girl who'd made a mistake. Maybe they'd believe her. Maybe they'd decide one orphaned street kid wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe. But when she opened her eyes again, Sophia found herself thinking about her parents. Not the way they'd died. She'd trained herself not to think about that, but the way they'd lived. Her father, who'd volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend despite working 60-hour weeks. Her mother, who'd spent her lunch breaks teaching elderly patients how to use smartphones to video call their grandchildren. They'd raised Sophia to believe that helping people was what you did, not because it was smart or safe or profitable, but because it was right. Because someone had to care about the 8-year-old girls in Honduras, even if caring got you buried alive in Puerto Rico. Those people, her parents, felt impossibly distant now. Like characters from a book Sophia had read long ago in a different life, when she'd been someone who could afford to care about things beyond her next meal. What if we went through the gap? She heard herself asking. Valentina turned to look at her with something that might have been surprise. That's not your fight, Nina. Maybe not. Sophia touched the gap in the wall, feeling cool air drift through from whatever lay beyond. But I'm already in it. The footsteps below stopped directly beneath them. Someone called out coordinates into a radio, reporting the second floor clear, moving to check the third level that didn't exist. They had 30 seconds, maybe less. If we go through there and it's a dead end, we're trapped, Valentina said. If we stay here, we're dead. Sophia was already moving toward the gap, her small frame allowing her to slip through spaces that would challenge someone Valentina's size. But as her fingers found purchase on the jagged concrete, doubt crashed over her like a wave. She was about to throw away her carefully constructed survival, everything she'd built from nothing. For a woman she'd known for 6 hours and a cause that had already failed once. The smart play was surrender. The safe play was surrender. But Sophia had stopped being a smart, safe person the moment she'd chosen to dig a stranger out of the rubble. "Come on," she whispered, disappearing into the darkness beyond the wall. The gap in the wall scraped against Sophia's ribs as she squeezed through, concrete dust filling her lungs with each shallow breath. On the other side, absolute darkness swallowed her whole. She'd expected another floor, maybe a basement. Instead, her feet found nothing but air. For one terrifying heartbeat, Sophia fell, not far, maybe 4 feet, before landing hard on what felt like a pile of metal sheeting. The crash echoed through whatever space she'd tumbled into, loud enough to wake the dead, or alert the very much alive killers searching for them 30 feet away. "Nina?" Valentina's voice came through the gap, tight with concern. "I'm okay," Sophia whispered back, though she wasn't sure that was true. Her left ankle throbbed, and something warm trickled down her arm where the jagged concrete had caught her. "But it's not a flaw, it's a drop." She could hear Valentina breathing hard on the other side of the wall, weighing options that were all terrible. Above them, boots thundered across the pharmacy's upper level, systematically checking every corner of Sophia's carefully constructed hideout. In seconds, they'd find the medical supplies, the organized food stores, the evidence that someone had been living there. "I'm coming through," Valentina said. "Wait," but it was too late. Valentina's larger frame scraped through the gap with considerably more difficulty, ripping fabric and reopening wounds Sophia had just bandaged. She dropped into the darkness beside Sophia with a grunt of pain that she quickly stifled. They crouched in silence, listening. Sophia's eyes slowly adjusted enough to make out shapes in the gloom. They were in some kind of sub-basement, probably part of the building's original foundation that had partially collapsed during the hurricane. Water dripped steadily from somewhere overhead, and the air smelled of mold and decay. But they were alive, and for the moment, hidden. "Can you walk?" Sophia whispered. Valentina tested her weight, favoring her left side. "Well enough." Through the gap behind them, Sophia could hear voices growing louder, more urgent. Someone had found her shelter. In minutes they'd start checking the walls for other exits. following every possible escape route with the methodical thoroughness of people who'd done this before. Sophia felt around in the darkness until her fingers found what she'd been hoping for, a doorway, or what remained of one. The frame was twisted from the building's collapse, but the opening led somewhere else, deeper into the underground maze that Hurricane Maria had created when it rearranged Humacau's geography. "This way," she said, guiding Valentina toward the passage. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, Sophia using skills she'd developed over 3 months of navigating unstable ruins. Step here where the concrete was solid, avoid that area where rebar jutted from the floor like broken bones. Listen for the sound of dripping water that might indicate a path to the surface, or the hollow echo that meant they were walking over a void. Behind them, shouts erupted from the pharmacy. They'd found the gap in the wall. "Faster," Sophia urged, though she knew Valentina was already moving as quickly as her injuries allowed. The passage branched, and Sophia made a choice based on nothing more than instinct, left toward what she hoped was the harbor district. If they could reach the water, there might be boats, ways off the island that didn't involve roads or airports or places where 8 SUVs could corner them. But with each step deeper into the underground ruins, Sophia felt her old life falling away like shed skin, the careful routines that had kept her alive, the predictable dangers she'd learned to navigate, the simple goal of surviving one more day. All of it belonged to someone else now. She was following a woman who'd stolen money from human traffickers, running toward a mission she didn't understand, in service of children she'd never meet, making choices that her 3 months ago self would have recognized as suicidal. The passage opened into a larger space, some kind of storage area that had been flooded and drained multiple times since the storm. Emergency lighting flickered weakly from a battery backup system that somehow still functioned, casting everything in sickly yellow shadows. Valentina leaned against a concrete pillar, breathing hard. "You should know something, Nina. Even if we get out of here, they won't stop hunting us. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about what happens to people who think they can stand against MS-13 and live to tell about it." Sophia nodded, unsurprised. She'd crossed that line the moment she'd chosen the gap in the wall over surrender. There was no going back to being an anonymous street kid now, no returning to her careful, small survival. "The children you tried to save," Sophia said. "Were there others? Other shipments?" "Every month. Sometimes more." Sophia closed her eyes, seeing faces she'd never known but could imagine. Girls her own age, maybe younger, trapped in situations that made surviving a hurricane seem simple by comparison. When she opened her eyes again, something fundamental had shifted inside her chest. The scared, careful girl who'd been focused only on her own survival was still there, would probably always be there. But she wasn't driving anymore. "Then we keep going," Sophia said. The emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging them back into absolute darkness. Sophia felt Valentina tense beside her, both of them listening for sounds of pursuit echoing through the passages behind them. "We need to move," Sophia whispered, but as she took a step forward, her foot splashed into water that hadn't been there moments before. The sound echoed off unseen walls, and she realized the space was larger than she'd thought, and filling fast. "The tide," Valentina said grimly. "We're below sea level." Sophia's mind raced through the geography she'd memorized over 3 months of survival. They'd been heading toward the harbor district, but Hurricane Maria had rewritten the coastline, creating new channels where water could flow inland during high tide. What had seemed like an escape route was becoming a trap. Behind them, flashlight beams suddenly cut through the darkness of the passage they'd just left. Voices echoed off concrete walls, speaking in the same flat Central American accents that had driven them underground in the first place. "Found the trail," someone called out in Spanish. "Blood on the walls, fresh." Sophia pressed herself against the pillar, feeling water creep up past her ankles. They had maybe 10 minutes before this space became completely flooded, less time before their pursuers reached this chamber. The mathematics of survival had never been this stark. There, Valentina pointed toward the far end of the space, where Sophia could barely make out another opening. But we'll have to swim for it if the water keeps rising. Sophia nodded, though swimming had never been part of her post-hurricane skill set. Learning to dive for salvage in shallow tide pools was different from navigating flooded underground passages in complete darkness. They waded forward, water now reaching Sophia's knees and rising steadily. The current was stronger than expected, pulling at her legs with each step. Behind them, the flashlight beams grew brighter. "Nina," Valentina said suddenly, her voice carrying a weight that made Sophia stop moving. "What I said before about the shelter in Honduras. There's something else." Sophia waited, water swirling around her waist now, cold and insistent. "I had a daughter," Valentina continued, barely audible over the sound of rising water. 7 years old. MS-13 recruited me by threatening her, said they'd kill her if I didn't work for them, so I did everything they asked. Smuggling, enforcement, things that kept me awake at night, all to keep her safe. The flashlight beams were close enough now to illuminate the entrance to their chamber. Sophia could hear multiple voices, coordinating search patterns with military precision. "What happened to her?" Sophia asked, though part of her already knew. "They killed her anyway. Said it was an accident, wrong place at the wrong time. But I knew better." Valentina's voice went flat, emotionless. "That's when I took their money. Not for some noble cause, for revenge." The shelter in Honduras was just the first step. Sophia absorbed this information while water rose to her chest, while armed killers closed the distance between them. Everything she'd believed about Valentina's motivation shifted, rearranged itself into something more complex and far more dangerous. "So this isn't about saving children," Sophia said. "This is about destroying MS-13. Can't it be both?" Before Sophia could answer, the first flashlight beam swept into their chamber, illuminating the rising water and their exposed position. Shouts erupted from the passage. They'd been found. "Swim," Valentina commanded, pushing Sophia toward the far opening as gunfire erupted behind them. Sophia dove forward, her limited swimming skills barely adequate for the task. The water was murky, filled with debris and sharp edges that caught at her clothes. She could hear Valentina struggling behind her, injured ribs making each stroke an exercise in controlled agony. Bullets snapped through the water around them, their pursuers firing blind into the flooded chamber. Sophia's lungs burned, but the opening was close now, maybe 10 feet away. Then she felt Valentina's grip on her ankle, pulling her back. Sophia surfaced, gasping, to see 3 figures in tactical gear emerging from the passage. Assault rifles trained on the water where they floated. The lead figure, a man with facial tattoos that marked him as MS-13 hierarchy, smiled when he saw them. "Valentina Cruz," he called out in accented English, clearly meant for Sophia's benefit. "And a little girl who thinks kindness makes her a hero." Sophia treaded water, studying the man's face, the way he held his weapon, the positioning of the 2 men flanking him. In the back of her mind, the analytical part that had kept her alive began calculating angles, distances, possibilities. "My name is Carlos Mendez," the man continued. "I knew Valentina when she was still useful to our organization, before she decided children's lives were worth more than her own." He gestured with his rifle, indicating they should swim closer to shore. "The girl comes with us. She's become something of a celebrity since that video went viral. Our leadership wants to meet her personally." Sophia looked at Valentina, seeing her own death reflected in the older woman's eyes. They'd run out of escape routes, out of luck, out of time. But Sophia had learned something important in 3 months of impossible survival. Sometimes the only way forward was through the thing that scared you most. "What video?" Sophia asked, stalling for time, while her mind worked furiously through options that all seemed to end in bullets. Carlos smiled wider. "The one where you save our traitor's life. 2 million views and counting." Sophia felt the water around her legs grow suddenly warmer, and she realized with sick clarity that she'd lost control of her bladder. The fear was that complete, that overwhelming. 2 million people had watched her dig Valentina from the rubble. 2 million witnesses to the moment her anonymous survival had ended forever. "I don't understand," she said, though part of her absolutely did. Someone had filmed her giving water to a bloodied stranger, posted it online, turned her simple act of mercy into a viral sensation. In the old world, before the hurricane, she might have been celebrated. Now it had painted a target on her back that stretched across 2 continents. Carlos gestured again with his rifle, more impatiently this time. "Swim closer, Nina. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But Sophia's analytical mind was working through the implications faster than her fear could process them. If the video had gone viral, if she'd become some kind of celebrity, then killing her outright would create complications, witnesses, investigations, international attention that MS-13 preferred to avoid. "The leadership wants to meet me," she repeated. "Not kill me? That depends entirely on how cooperative you choose to be." Valentina moved closer to Sophia in the water, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't trust him. Whatever they're offering, whatever they say about keeping you safe, it's a lie." "I can hear you, Valentina," Carlos said conversationally. "And you're right, of course. But the girl doesn't have many options at the moment." Sophia studied the flooded chamber, calculating distances and possibilities with the same methodical precision she'd used to survive 3 months of impossible odds. The opening they'd been swimming toward was maybe 8 feet away, but she'd have to dive underwater to reach it, and these men could simply follow. The passage they'd entered through was blocked by armed killers. The water was still rising, but not fast enough to level the playing field, which left exactly one option that might keep them both alive long enough to find another escape route. "I'll come with you," Sophia said suddenly. "But she stays here." Both Valentina and Carlos stared at her with identical expressions of surprise. It was Valentina who spoke first. "Nina, no. You don't know what you're—" "I know exactly what I'm doing," Sophia interrupted, though that was only partially true. She was making choices based on incomplete information and desperation, the same combination that had kept her alive since October. "You said your leadership wants to meet me because of the video. Fine, but this isn't about her anymore. It's about me." Carlos tilted his head, studying Sophia with the same analytical attention she'd been giving him. "Very mature for 12 years old, but I'm afraid that's not how this works." "Actually, it is." Sophia forced her voice to remain steady, channeling every ounce of confidence she'd learned to project when scavenging supplies from territorial adults. "You need me alive and cooperative, which means you need me to trust you. Killing her in front of me doesn't accomplish that goal." She could see Carlos processing this logic, weighing the tactical advantages against his orders. Behind him, one of his men shifted impatiently, finger hovering near his trigger. "Besides," Sophia continued, "what's she going to do? She's injured, trapped underground, and you've got 7,000 gang members looking for her across the island. Let me come willingly, and she becomes someone else's problem." It was a desperate gamble based on reading Carlos's body language, the way he held himself with the confidence of someone used to command decisions. Sophia was betting that he'd prefer to complete his primary objective, securing her cooperation, rather than risk a firefight in a flooding chamber that might leave him with nothing but corpses. "Clever girl," Carlos said finally. "I can see why the video resonated with people. Very well." He gestured to his men, who lowered their weapons slightly but remained ready. "Swim to the ledge there, slowly. No sudden movements." Sophia began moving through the water, but Valentina's hand caught her wrist. "This isn't your fight," Valentina repeated. But now Sophia could hear something else in her voice. Not just concern for Sophia's safety, but fear of being abandoned, fear of facing whatever came next alone. For 3 months, Sophia had been utterly alone, making every decision based solely on her own survival. The idea of being responsible for someone else, of having her choices affect another person's fate, should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first meaningful thing she'd done since her parents died. "Maybe it wasn't my fight before," Sophia said quietly, "but it is now." She squeezed Valentina's hand once, then let go, swimming toward Carlos and his men and whatever waited beyond this flooded chamber. Behind her, she could hear Valentina moving toward the underwater passage, using Sophia's surrender as the distraction they both needed. The water grew shallower as Sophia approached the ledge where Carlos waited. Soon she'd be close enough for him to grab her, close enough that any chance of escape would vanish completely. But as her feet found purchase on the submerged concrete, Sophia realized something had fundamentally changed in the last few minutes. She was no longer just trying to survive. She was actively choosing her path forward, consequences and all. Carlos's hand closed around Sophia's arm with surprising gentleness, but she could feel the strength beneath his restraint, fingers that could snap her wrist without effort. As he pulled her from the water, Sophia's analytical mind catalogued everything: the tactical positioning of his men, the exits from this chamber, the sound of Valentina's movement toward the underwater passage growing fainter. "Smart choice, Nina," Carlos murmured, but his eyes tracked the water where Valentina had disappeared. "Though I wonder if you understand what you've just committed yourself to." Sophia's feet touched solid ground, water streaming from her clothes. The emergency lighting flickered back to life, casting their shadows in harsh relief against the concrete walls. In the improved visibility, she could see details that terrified her: the casual way Carlos's men held their weapons, the MS-13 tattoos marking them as enforcers, the methodical way they'd already begun sealing the chamber's exits. "The video," Sophia said, forcing herself to meet Carlos's gaze. "How many people actually saw it? By now, 5 million, maybe more." Carlos smiled, and Sophia realized with sick clarity that he was enjoying this conversation. "You've become quite the symbol, little girl. Kindness in the face of devastation, hope rising from the ruins, very inspiring." One of his men, a younger gangster with neck tattoos, shifted impatiently. "We should move. The tide's still rising, and command wants her at the compound before dawn." Carlos nodded but didn't release Sophia's arm. "Tell me, Nina, what did you think would happen when you helped her? Did you imagine there would be no consequences for showing mercy to MS-13's enemies?" The question hit Sophia like a physical blow because it forced her to confront a truth she'd been avoiding. She hadn't thought about consequences at all. For 3 months, her decisions had been simple: food, shelter, safety, survival. Helping Valentina had been the first choice she'd made based on something larger than her own immediate needs. "I thought she would die if I didn't help her," Sophia said finally. "Everything else seemed less important than that." Carlos studied her with the focused attention of a predator evaluating prey. "And now, knowing what your kindness has cost you, would you make the same choice again?" Behind them, the sound of Valentina's movement had stopped. Either she'd found another way out, or she'd drowned in the flooded passages. Sophia would never know which, and that uncertainty felt like a weight settling permanently in her chest. "Yes," Sophia said, and meant it. Something shifted in Carlos's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a flicker of something almost like respect. "Most adults would lie to me right now. Tell me they regretted their choice, beg for another chance. I'm not most adults." "No," Carlos agreed. "You're something much more dangerous." He gestured to his men, and they began moving toward the passage they'd emerged from. Sophia found herself being led deeper into the underground maze, away from the flooded chamber where she'd made her choice, toward whatever waited in the world above. But as they walked, Sophia realized that her surrender hadn't been the defeat it appeared to be. She was inside MS-13's operational structure now, close enough to see how they moved, how they communicated, what their plans might be. Information that could be valuable if she survived long enough to use it. "The compound you mentioned," Sophia said as they navigated a narrow corridor. "Is that where you're taking all the other children?" Carlos's grip on her arm tightened slightly. "What other children?" "The ones Valentina was trying to save. The trafficking operation." Sophia kept her voice carefully neutral, but she could see her words having an effect on the men around her. Glances exchanged, tension ratcheting higher. "Clever and dangerous," Carlos muttered. "You're going to be a problem, aren't you?" Before Sophia could answer, they reached a vertical shaft where rope ladders led upward toward street level. Carlos gestured for her to climb first, and Sophia realized that once she reached the surface, her last connection to the underground world that had sheltered her would be severed completely. As she began climbing, hand over hand toward the circle of grey light above, Sophia felt the full weight of what she'd set in motion settling on her shoulders. She was 12 years old, alone, climbing toward a confrontation with people who trafficked children and killed anyone who stood in their way. But for the first time since her parents died, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting for something larger than herself, and that transformation, terrifying as it was, felt like the person she'd been meant to become all along. The circle of light grew larger with each rung of the ladder. Soon she'd emerge into whatever waited above, face whatever test would determine whether her choice to help Valentina had been noble sacrifice or fatal mistake. Either way, there was no turning back now. Sophia's head emerged from the underground shaft into a world transformed by chaos. The grey dawn light revealed San Juan's streets teeming with vehicles she'd never seen before, armored SUVs with tinted windows, motorcycles weaving between abandoned cars, and clusters of men with assault rifles positioned on rooftops like an occupying army. The viral video hadn't just brought Carlos and his small team, it had triggered an invasion. 7,000, Carlos said quietly, watching her absorb the magnitude of what her simple act of mercy had unleashed. "That's how many soldiers are converging on this island because of you. Men who've traveled from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, all hunting for the girl who saved our traitor." Sophia's knees nearly buckled as the full scope of the catastrophe hit her. Every person with a weapon, every vehicle choking the hurricane-damaged streets, every family now cowering behind locked doors, all of it traced back to her decision to share water with a bleeding stranger. The analytical part of her mind that had kept her alive began calculating the ripple effects with horrifying precision. Carlos's men formed a protective perimeter around her as they moved toward a black SUV, but Sophia realized the protection wasn't for her safety. It was to ensure no other MS-13 faction could claim the prize she represented. Through the vehicle's bulletproof windows, she watched neighborhoods she'd scavenged for months transform into war zones. "The other children you mentioned," Carlos said as they drove through streets now patrolled by gangs. "How did you know about them?" Sophia's mouth went dry. In her desperation to protect Valentina, she'd revealed information that marked her as more than an innocent bystander. "She told me about the trafficking operation. What else did she tell you?" The SUV's interior felt like a tomb, air thick with the smell of gun oil and Carlos's cologne. Sophia watched a group of children, refugees like herself, scatter as their convoy approached, and she realized her viral fame had made every vulnerable person on the island a potential target. Nothing else, Sophia lied, but Carlos's expression told her he didn't believe it. "You see, Nina, this is where your story becomes complicated." Carlos produced a tablet, swiping to a news article that made Sophia's blood freeze. The headline read, "Hurricane Hero Girl's Family Revealed as Puerto Rican Intelligence Assets." Below it was a photograph of her parents, her dead parents, alongside their real names and a detailed exposé of their work infiltrating criminal organizations before the storm hit. Every carefully constructed lie about being an orphaned refugee crumbled as Sophia stared at their faces. "Your mother was DEA. Your father worked for Homeland Security. Both of them were building cases against MS-13's Caribbean operations when Hurricane Maria provided such convenient cover for their deaths." Carlos's voice carried a satisfaction that made Sophia feel sick. "So you'll understand why we're curious about what skills they might have taught their prodigy daughter before they died." The SUV's walls seemed to close in around her as Sophia realized the true depth of her miscalculation. She'd thought her parents' deaths were random tragedy, that their professional lives had died with them in the storm. But MS-13 had known all along who she was, had probably been watching her survival with professional interest. "The video wasn't an accident," Sophia whispered. "Very good. One of our assets filmed it, posted it with careful timing and hashtags designed for maximum viral impact. We needed you to surface voluntarily, you see. Much easier than hunting through every refugee camp and shelter on the island." Sophia's hands began to shake as she understood the trap's true dimensions. Every choice she'd made, helping Valentina, trusting her instincts, believing she was fighting for something meaningful, had been manipulated from the beginning. She wasn't a hero who'd stumbled into danger. She was a target who'd walked willingly into a 3-month-long operation designed specifically to capture her. "Valentina," Sophia said suddenly. "Is she even real?" Carlos smiled with genuine appreciation. "Oh, she's very real. Her daughter's death, her theft of our money, her mission to expose our operations, all true. We simply guided her to a location where she'd intersect with your scavenging routes. Amazing how small kindnesses can be weaponized, isn't it?" The SUV pulled into a compound surrounded by razor wire and guard towers, but Sophia barely registered their arrival. Everything she'd believed about her survival, her choices, her transformation from frightened child to determined fighter, all of it had been choreographed by the very people she thought she was opposing. Worse, Valentina hadn't escaped at all. She'd played her role perfectly, allowing herself to appear vulnerable so Sophia would sacrifice herself for someone who'd been working with MS-13 from the beginning. As armed men surrounded the vehicle, Sophia realized she'd lost more than her freedom or her life. She'd lost her ability to trust her own judgment, to believe in the meaning of her choices. The viral video that had made her famous was already being weaponized to recruit other children, showing them that even heroes ended up in compounds surrounded by killers. 7,000 gangsters had come to the island because a 12-year-old girl believed kindness mattered more than survival. She'd never felt more completely, devastatingly alone. The revelation. But as the SUV's door opened and Carlos gestured for her to step into the compound, something crystallized in Sophia's mind with startling clarity. The shaking in her hands stopped. The crushing weight of manipulation and betrayal didn't disappear, but it transformed into something harder, more focused. She was alone, but she'd been alone for 3 months. And she'd survived. "You made a mistake," Sophia said quietly, not moving from the vehicle. Carlos paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Excuse me? You think you know me because you knew my parents. You think you understand what I'm capable of because you manipulated me into helping Valentina." Sophia's voice grew steadier with each word. "But you don't actually know anything about who I became down in those tunnels." For the first time since she'd met him, Carlos looked uncertain. "Enlighten me." Sophia stepped from the SUV, but instead of the defeated child Carlos expected, she moved with the calculated precision of someone who'd learned to evaluate every threat, every opportunity, every possible escape route. The compound's layout registered automatically: guard positions, camera angles, structural weaknesses in the razor wire fence. "My parents were intelligence assets, but they died 3 months ago. The person you captured isn't the scared little girl who lost her family in the hurricane." Sophia met Carlos's gaze directly. "I'm someone who figured out how to survive in a city where 7,000 killers were hunting her. Someone who learned to read people well enough to manipulate gang members into revealing their plans." She gestured toward the compound around them. "You brought me here because you think I have information about my parents' operations. But what you actually have is someone who's spent 3 months studying MS-13's street-level tactics, learning your communication patterns, mapping your territory." Carlos's men shifted nervously, sensing the change in dynamics but not understanding it. Sophia could see realization dawning in Carlos's expression, the possibility that he'd outmaneuvered himself. "Even if that's true," Carlos said carefully, "you're still 12 years old, surrounded by armed men in a secured facility. And you're still someone who needed 3 months and 7,000 soldiers to catch one homeless child." Sophia smiled, and it wasn't a child's smile anymore. "The question is, Which one of us is really trapped here? She began walking toward the compound's main building, forcing Carlos and his men to follow her lead. As they moved, Sophia continued speaking with the same analytical precision she'd once applied to finding clean water and safe shelter. Valentina wasn't working with you from the beginning. You found her after she stole your money, used her desperation to make her a puppet, but she never stopped trying to expose the trafficking operation. That's why she told me about the children, because she knew I'd remember even if she couldn't survive to act on the information herself. Carlos grabbed her arm, stopping their procession. How could you possibly know that? Because I know what real desperation looks like. I know how people act when they're choosing between impossible options. Sophia's voice hardened. Valentina was terrified, but not of dying. She was terrified of failing those children. You can't fake that kind of fear. The compound's main door opened, revealing more armed men and a figure Sophia recognized from intelligence briefings her parents had shown her years ago. Miguel Santos, MS-13's Caribbean operations commander. A man whose capture would represent the biggest law enforcement victory against the organization in decades. So she does have her parents' eyes, Santos said, studying Sophia with professional interest. The question is, does she have their memory for details that could destroy us? Sophia felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't just about her parents' intelligence work or Valentina's stolen money. MS-13 was facing a crisis. Law enforcement pressure, internal power struggles, public attention from the viral video that was attracting unwanted scrutiny to their Puerto Rico operations. They needed this compound cleaned, their assets relocated, their vulnerabilities eliminated. But they also needed to know what intelligence might be compromised, what operations might be exposed, what damage her parents had done before they died. You're not here to interrogate me, Sophia realized aloud. You're here to evacuate. The viral video brought too much attention, and now you're shutting down the entire Caribbean network. Santos nodded slowly. Clever girl. And unfortunately for you, that means anyone with knowledge of our operations can't be allowed to leave this compound alive. But Sophia was already 3 moves ahead, her mind working with the cold efficiency her parents had trained into her, and the streets had sharpened to a razor edge. She'd walked into this trap deliberately, understanding that the only way to save the trafficked children was to get inside MS-13's operational center. Now, she was exactly where she needed to be to burn it all down. Sophia stood in the compound's main corridor, surrounded by armed men who believed they held all the power, and smiled with genuine satisfaction. They'd brought her exactly where she needed to be, inside their evacuation operation, close enough to their command structure to see everything they were trying to hide. You want to know what my parents taught me? She said, addressing Santos directly. They taught me that the best way to destroy an organization isn't from the outside, it's from within, when they think they've already won. Santos exchanged a glance with Carlos, and Sophia could see the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face. These men were accustomed to intimidating children, to breaking people through fear and violence. They weren't prepared for someone who'd walked into their compound with a plan. The trafficking operation isn't shutting down, Sophia continued, her voice carrying the analytical precision that had kept her alive on the streets. You're relocating it. All those children Valentina was trying to save, you're moving them before law enforcement can respond to the media attention. That's why you need 7,000 soldiers, not to hunt one girl, but to execute the largest human trafficking relocation in MS-13 history. The silence that followed her words told Sophia everything she needed to know. Around her, she could see the gang members processing the implications of a 12-year-old who understood their operations with intelligence-grade accuracy. The compound's layout, the shipping schedules, the communication protocols. I've been watching your street operations for 3 months, learning how you coordinate movements, how you secure transport, how you eliminate witnesses. Sophia gestured toward the building around them. Bringing me here was supposed to contain the threat I represented. Instead, you've given me access to your evacuation hub." Santos stepped closer, and Sophia could smell the cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of violence that clung to him. "Even if you understand our operations, you're still one child against an army." But Sophia was already reaching into the pocket of her worn jacket, withdrawing something that made every armed man in the corridor tense, a small electronic device her parents had hidden with their emergency supplies, something she'd discovered only days ago but had been studying obsessively since. "This is a satellite communicator," she said calmly. "Military grade, hardened against detection, with a direct line to a federal task force that's been waiting 3 months for actionable intelligence on your Caribbean operations." Carlos lunged forward, but Sophia was already backing toward a stairwell, the device held high enough that any sudden movement would send it crashing to the floor and triggering an automatic distress signal. "My parents weren't just intelligence assets," Sophia continued, her voice echoing in the compound's corridors. "They were deep-cover operatives who spent 2 years building cases against your organization. Everything they learned, every contact they made, every operational detail they gathered, it's all recorded in this device." The stairwell behind her led upward, toward the compound's communication center, where she could see banks of computers and radio equipment through reinforced windows. Sophia had spent 3 months learning to read buildings like survival manuals, and this one told a clear story: Central Command, weakly defended because they'd never expected an enemy to reach it. "You have a choice," Sophia said, still backing up the stairs as armed men followed at a careful distance. "Let me activate this communicator and share everything my parents learned, or help me destroy your trafficking operation voluntarily." Santos's laugh was cold and sharp. "You think we'll negotiate with a child? I think you'll negotiate with someone who can destroy 20 years of organizational development in the Caribbean." Sophia reached the top of the stairwell, the communication center's door just behind her. "Because that's what I am now. Not my parents' daughter, not a hurricane victim, not a viral video symbol. I'm the person who learned enough about your operations to burn them to the ground." Through the building's windows, she could see the controlled chaos of the evacuation operation. Vehicles loading cargo that wasn't cargo, personnel movements that followed patterns she now recognized as human trafficking logistics. The scope of it was staggering, but so was her position to disrupt it. "The children," Sophia said, her voice carrying new authority. "How many, and where are they being moved?" Santos gestured to his men, and Sophia heard the distinctive sound of weapons being raised. "You're not in a position to make demands." But Sophia was already turning the communicator's activation dial, watching as its display showed satellite connection establishing. "I'm in the exact position to make demands, because in 30 seconds, every federal agency hunting your organization will know precisely where to find you." The device's display shifted from red to amber, signal strengthening as it reached toward the satellites her parents had died protecting. Around her, she could feel the compound's entire power structure realigning as the people who trafficked children realized they were facing someone who understood exactly how much damage one determined person could do. Sophia had found her strength, and it was terrifying. The communicator's display flashed green. Connection established. In the sudden silence, Sophia could hear her own heartbeat, mixing with the electronic hum of equipment that now linked her to forces beyond this compound's razor wire. "Signal confirmed," she said, reading the device's display. "Federal task force is online and receiving real-time location data." She looked up at Santos, whose face had gone ashen. "They'll be here in 18 minutes, maybe less if they've been staging nearby." Carlos stepped forward, weapon raised, but Santos held up a restraining hand. Sophia could see the calculation in his eyes, the same cold math that had driven her survival for 3 months. Kill her now, and the signal would automatically escalate to every law enforcement agency hunting MS-13. Let her live, and she might still be useful. "What do you want?" Santos asked. But Sophia wasn't looking at him anymore. Through the communication center's windows, she could see vehicles moving with increasing urgency throughout the compound. Her ultimatum had accelerated their timeline, forcing them to choose between a careful evacuation and a panicked retreat. "I want you to understand something," Sophia said, backing through the communication center's doorway. "My parents died believing their work mattered, that exposing people like you was worth sacrificing everything for. For 3 months, I thought that was naive. I thought survival was the only thing that mattered." The room behind her was exactly what she'd hoped. Banks of computers showing shipping manifests, transportation schedules, financial records. Everything needed to coordinate a trafficking operation spanning multiple countries. Everything that could be used to trace every child, every route, every person involved. But watching your evacuation operation, seeing the scope of what you do to children, Sophia's voice hardened. "I realized my parents were right. Some things are worth dying for." Santos entered the communication center slowly, his men flanking him. Sophia could see him evaluating the room's contents, understanding what intelligence treasure trove she now controlled. But she could also see something else in his expression, recognition that she wasn't bluffing about the federal response. "You're going to help me download everything," Sophia said, gesturing toward the computers. "Every trafficking route, every safe house, every corrupt official you've compromised, all of it. And if we refuse?" Sophia held up the communicator, its display now showing multiple agency confirmations. "Then in 15 minutes, this compound becomes a war zone, and every piece of evidence gets seized instead of selectively leaked. Your entire organization gets exposed instead of just the trafficking network." It was a calculated gamble based on everything she'd learned about criminal psychology from her parents and survival instincts from the streets. Give Santos a choice between total destruction and controlled damage, and he might choose the option that left him room to rebuild. "You're offering us a deal," Santos said slowly. "I'm offering you the chance to sacrifice the trafficking operation to save your broader organization." Sophia moved toward the nearest computer terminal. "Help me expose the child trafficking network completely. Every route, every handler, every buyer. And I'll limit the intelligence leak to just that operation." Carlos laughed harshly. "You think we'll destroy our most profitable enterprise to save ourselves?" But Sophia could see Santos considering it, running the same calculation she'd been making. The viral video had brought scrutiny they couldn't manage indefinitely. Law enforcement pressure was increasing. Political attention was focusing on their Caribbean operations. The trafficking network was becoming a liability that threatened everything else. 12 minutes, Sophia said, watching the communicator's countdown. "And I should mention, if anything happens to me, this device automatically uploads everything my parents recorded about your organization. Not just trafficking, everything." The weight of that threat settled over the room like smoke. Sophia's parents had been deep-cover operatives for 2 years. They would have gathered intelligence on financial networks, political corruption, internal power structures, information that could destroy MS-13's entire Caribbean presence. Santos moved to the computer terminal beside her. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "I'm someone who has nothing left to lose," Sophia replied, watching him begin accessing the trafficking databases. "Except the chance to make sure those children get home." Through the windows she could see helicopters on the horizon, distant specks that might be news crews or law enforcement or both. The viral video that had started this nightmare was about to become the story of its resolution, with her at the center of the largest human trafficking bust in Caribbean history. Sophia had spent 3 months learning to survive in a world that wanted to destroy her. Now she was about to discover if survival was enough, or if her parents had been right about the importance of fighting for something larger than yourself. The computers around her held the locations of dozens of children who might still be saved if she was willing to finish what she'd started. The computers hummed to life around Sophia as Santos's fingers moved across the keyboard, each keystroke revealing another layer of the trafficking network she was determined to destroy. But as the data began flowing across multiple screens, Sophia realized the scope was far beyond anything she'd imagined. 47 children currently in transport, Santos said, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone reading a shipping manifest. Destinations across 6 countries, ages 8 to 16. Sophia felt her stomach clench, but forced herself to maintain the cold, analytical focus that had kept her alive. Where are they now? 3 vessels at sea, 2 convoys moving overland through Central America, 1 flight preparing to depart from a private airfield. Santos's eyes met hers. Even with this information, your federal friends won't be able to intercept them all. But Sophia was already studying the routes displayed on the screens, her mind processing the logistical patterns with the same systematic approach she'd used to map gang territories. The airfield departure, that's the priority target. Once they're airborne, they disappear completely. 10 children on that flight, Santos confirmed, leaving in. He checked another screen, 37 minutes. Sophia calculated rapidly. The federal task force was still 8 minutes out. Even if they moved immediately, they'd need time to coordinate with aviation authorities, locate the airfield, mobilize intercept capabilities. It would be close, possibly too close. Give me direct access to their communication systems, she demanded. Santos hesitated, and Sophia could see him weighing his options. Around them, his men shifted nervously as the distant sound of helicopters grew louder. The compound's evacuation was accelerating into chaos as personnel abandoned non-essential equipment and destroyed sensitive documents. Those communications will implicate hundreds of our operatives, Santos said. And saving those 47 children will destroy your most profitable operation, Sophia replied. But it will also prove that you cooperated, which might matter when your organization faces federal prosecution. It was psychological manipulation at its most clinical, offering Santos a narrative where betraying his own operation became a strategic victory rather than defeat. Sophia had learned from watching Valentina that even hardened criminals needed to believe their choices served some form of personal logic. Santos entered additional access codes, and new windows cascaded across the monitors, radio frequencies, encrypted message channels, GPS tracking for vehicles Sophia now realized were mobile prisons. The scope of coordinated evil was staggering, but so was her position to disrupt it. Flight manifest for the aircraft, Sophia said, scanning the data streams. I need pilot communications, flight plan, passenger, cargo details. The euphemistic language couldn't hide what she was seeing. 10 children, their ages and physical descriptions listed like livestock inventory. But also something else, a communication protocol that showed the aircraft systems were networked, controllable remotely for navigation safety. The planes have emergency override capabilities, Sophia realized aloud. Air traffic control can force them to land if necessary. Only with proper federal authority and correct override codes, Santos said, watching her make connections he clearly hadn't expected. But Sophia was remembering her parents' technical training, the hours they'd spent teaching her about communication systems and security protocols. The communicator I'm carrying, it's not just for contact, it's designed to interface with federal aviation systems for exactly this kind of emergency intervention. She began connecting the device to the compound's computer network, watching as its advanced systems automatically began handshaking with databases that contained the override codes Santos had mentioned. Her parents had died protecting intelligence assets that included the capability to ground aircraft involved in trafficking operations. 5 minutes until federal arrival, Sophia announced, monitoring multiple data streams simultaneously. But if I can establish aviation override authority in the next 2 minutes, we can force that aircraft down before it reaches international airspace. Santos stared at the cascading data connections she was establishing. How is a 12-year-old girl operating federal-grade intelligence equipment? Because my parents spent 2 years training me to be their backup plan, Sophia replied, her fingers flying across keyboards with precision that would have made her parents proud. They knew that if something happened to them, someone would need to finish their work. The communicator's display shifted again, showing new connections establishing with aviation authorities. Around her, Sophia could hear the compound's evacuation reaching critical urgency as vehicles departed and personnel abandoned positions. But she was locked in digital combat now, racing against flight schedules and federal response times. Through the windows, she could see the helicopters were no longer distant specks. They were close enough to identify as federal aircraft, approaching with the systematic precision of a coordinated assault. The viral video that had exposed her was about to become the catalyst for the largest human trafficking bust in Caribbean history. Sophia's fingers found the final command sequence, the one that would either save 10 children or reveal that she'd overestimated her parents' legacy systems. Everything her family had died for came down to this moment, whether one determined child could finish what 2 dedicated operatives had started. The screen flashed green. Override authority confirmed. The compound erupted into chaos as Sophia's override command transmitted across secured federal networks. Alarms began wailing throughout the building, while emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. But Sophia kept her eyes locked on the communicator's display, watching as aviation systems responded to her parents' hidden protocols. "Aircraft override in progress," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. "Flight 447 is being forced into emergency landing procedures." Santos lunged toward her, but the federal helicopters were already thundering overhead, their spotlights turning the compound into a blazing arena. Through the communication center's windows, Sophia could see repelling lines dropping as tactical teams began their assault. The sound was deafening. Rotors, sirens, shouted commands in multiple languages. "You've destroyed us," Santos snarled. But Sophia was still working, her fingers dancing across keyboards as she uploaded terabytes of trafficking data to federal servers. "I've destroyed your trafficking network," Sophia corrected, watching progress bars fill with criminal evidence that would save dozens of children, just like my parents planned. Carlos appeared in the doorway behind Santos, his weapon drawn, but before he could act, the building shook with the impact of federal entry charges. Doors throughout the compound were being breached simultaneously as the coordinated assault reached full intensity. Sophia could hear boots on stairs, tactical commands echoing through corridors, the systematic advance of justice her parents had died protecting. But Santos wasn't finished. He pulled his own weapon, pointing it directly at Sophia, while his eyes remained fixed on the computer screens, showing his empire's destruction in real time. "Stop the upload, or I'll kill you right now." "Then you'll die with me," Sophia replied calmly, not pausing in her work. "Because those federal agents are about 30 seconds from reaching this room, and they'll assume you murdered a child witness." The psychological calculation was brutally simple, but Santos understood it. Killing her now would guarantee his death, while letting her live might still offer escape options. Sophia had learned from 3 months of survival that even desperate people could be predicted if you understood their motivations. Santos kept the weapon trained on her, but Sophia could see his attention splitting between her and the sounds of federal agents advancing through the building. He was trapped between competing impossibilities: stop her and die, or let her finish and face life imprisonment. "The children on the flight," Sophia said, reading new data streams. "They're being escorted to a private airfield outside San Juan. Ground teams are already moving to intercept." She looked up at Santos. "Your operation is over." "Our operation spans 12 countries, Santos replied. "Destroying one network won't stop anything." But Sophia was already accessing deeper database layers, following financial connections and communication protocols that revealed the trafficking network's integration with MS-13's broader criminal structure. Maybe not, but it will save 47 children, and it will prove that someone cared enough to try. The door behind Carlos exploded inward as federal agents breached the communication center. Sophia dropped to the floor as tactical teams flooded the room, their weapons trained on Santos and his men, while specialized equipment officers moved immediately to secure the computer systems she'd been operating. Target secured, someone announced over radio. Priority witness is safe. Sophia remained on the floor, watching as Santos and Carlos were forced to their knees while agents in tactical gear secured the room. But her attention was on the computer screens, where upload progress bars showed trafficking data still flowing to federal servers. The children's locations, their captors' identities, the financial networks supporting their enslavement, all of it racing through communication channels her parents had died protecting. "Ma'am, we need you to step away from the computers," an agent said, approaching Sophia carefully. "2 more minutes," Sophia replied, not moving. "The upload isn't complete, and there are children still in transport." The agent looked at the screens, his expression shifting as he recognized the scope of intelligence Sophia had accessed. "Jesus Christ, how much data are we talking about?" "Everything," Sophia said simply. 2 years of deep cover intelligence on MS-13's Caribbean trafficking operations, routes, handlers, buyers, corruption networks, financial systems. My parents documented all of it. Through the shattered windows, Sophia could hear the compound's systematic dismantling as federal teams secured evidence and arrested fleeing personnel. But she remained focused on the data streams, watching as the final trafficking records uploaded to servers that would ensure the children's rescue and their captors' prosecution. The screen flashed a final confirmation: upload complete. 47 children's locations transmitted to rescue teams across 6 countries. Sophia finally stood, her legs unsteady after hours of tension and adrenaline. Around her, federal agents were cataloging evidence that would dismantle one of the largest trafficking networks in the Caribbean. The viral video that had made her a target had become the catalyst for justice her parents had always envisioned. She had kept her promise to Valentina. She had finished her parents' work, and she had proven that sometimes one person willing to risk everything could change the world. Sophia watched the federal agents secure Santos and his men, but even in victory, she felt something hollow expanding in her chest. The mission was complete, the children would be saved, her parents' work was finished, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment marked the end of something she could never reclaim. "Sophia Restrepo?" A woman in a tactical vest approached, her voice gentle despite the chaos surrounding them. "I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI. We need to get you to safety." "Where's Valentina?" Sophia asked, scanning the room. In all the digital warfare and tactical operations, she'd lost track of the woman who'd started this journey with her. Did she make it out?" Agent Martinez's expression shifted slightly. "Ms. Cruz was extracted 20 minutes ago. She's in federal custody, receiving medical attention." Something in her tone made Sophia's stomach drop. Custody? She helped orchestrate this entire operation. Without her, those children... "Miss Cruz is still a wanted fugitive with multiple outstanding warrants," Agent Martinez explained carefully. "Her cooperation will be noted, but she'll face prosecution for her previous crimes." The words hit Sophia like physical blows. After everything they'd endured together, all the trust and sacrifice and partnership, Valentina would still pay for her past. The justice Sophia had fought for was apparently selective, saving innocent children while condemning the woman who'd made their rescue possible. "I need to see her," Sophia said, moving toward the door. "That's not possible right now." Agent Martinez's voice remained kind but firm. "You're both key witnesses in what will likely become the largest trafficking prosecution in Caribbean history. Contact between witnesses could compromise the case." Sophia felt the walls of bureaucracy closing around her, the same institutional machinery that had failed to protect her parents, now separating her from the only person who truly understood her journey. "She saved my life. Multiple times. She chose to help those children instead of escaping when she could have run. And her cooperation will be documented," Agent Martinez assured her. "But Sophia, you need to understand, your safety is our priority now. MS-13 has put a price on your head that won't disappear overnight. The threat against you is ongoing." The full weight of her situation was finally crystallizing. She'd won the battle but inherited a war. Saving those 47 children had painted a permanent target on her back, one that would follow her for years, maybe forever. She'd traded her childhood, her anonymity, her chance at a normal life for the lives of strangers she'd never meet. "Where will I go?" Sophia asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Witness protection," Agent Martinez confirmed. "New identity, new location, complete separation from your previous life. It's the only way to keep you safe from retaliation." Sophia looked around the communications center one last time, taking in the computers that had been her weapon, the scattered papers documenting horrors she'd helped expose, the evidence that would save children while erasing her own existence. She'd become a ghost in service of justice. "My parents," she said quietly. "Their bodies, they deserve a proper burial." "That's being arranged," Agent Martinez said gently. "But you won't be able to attend. Any public appearance would compromise your protection." Another sacrifice, another piece of her former life cut away in the name of survival. Sophia had spent 3 months learning that survival came with a price, but she was only now understanding how steep that price could be. She would live, but as someone else entirely, carrying the memories of her family and her mission in permanent isolation. Through the windows, she could see dawn breaking over Puerto Rico, painting the devastated landscape in soft gold light. Somewhere out there, 47 children were being freed because of choices she'd made in this room. Somewhere else, trafficking networks were collapsing because she'd been willing to risk everything for strangers. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the most profound loss of her life. "There's something else," Agent Martinez said carefully. "The viral video that started this, it's still spreading. You're becoming something of a symbol. The girl who saved the MS-13 woman who brought down the trafficking network. People are calling you a hero." Sophia laughed bitterly. Heroes in stories got to go home after their victories. Heroes got recognition, gratitude, the chance to build something better from their sacrifice. She would get a new name and a lifetime of looking over her shoulder. "I just wanted to keep my promise," Sophia said, thinking of Valentina somewhere in federal custody, facing prosecution despite her redemption. "I wanted to finish what my parents started." "You did," Agent Martinez said, "more completely than they ever imagined possible." Sophia nodded, watching the sunrise illuminate the compound where she'd fought the most important battle of her life. She'd won everything and lost herself in the process. The price of saving those children was the erasure of Sofia Restrepo, the girl who'd discovered that sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing everything you'd ever been. She was ready to pay it. The safe house overlooked a quiet bay 30 miles from San Juan, its windows offering a view of waters that sparkled with deceptive peace. Sophia sat in the sterile living room, watching federal agents move through their post-operation routines while she processed the magnitude of what had just ended. The aircraft was successfully grounded in Barbados, Agent Martinez reported, settling into the chair across from Sophia. All 10 children recovered safely. They're receiving medical attention and trauma counseling. She paused, consulting her tablet. The coordinated raids across 6 countries netted 47 total recoveries. The youngest was 8 years old. Sophia nodded, feeling the weight of those numbers. 8 years old, younger than she'd been when her parents started their undercover work. A child who would grow up free because Sophia had chosen to share water with a bloodied stranger beneath hurricane debris. The ripple effects of that single moment of compassion had spread farther than she could have imagined. "Santos and his immediate network are in federal custody," Agent Martinez continued. "We've frozen 14 bank accounts across 7 countries, seized properties valued at over $50 million, and identified corruption networks that reach into government offices from here to Honduras." She looked up from the tablet. "Your parents' intelligence was extraordinary. They documented everything." The mention of her parents sent a familiar ache through Sophia's chest. She'd completed their mission, but they would never know. They died believing their work would remain buried with them, never imagining their 12-year-old daughter would one day finish what they'd started. She wondered if they would have wanted this outcome, their child transformed into a fugitive to save children they'd never met. "What about Valentina?" Sophia asked, though she dreaded the answer. Agent Martinez's expression grew careful. "She's cooperating fully with prosecution teams. Her testimony is crucial. She's the only insider witness who can verify how deep MS-13's trafficking operations reach." A pause. "She asked me to tell you something." Sophia waited, her heart hammering. "She said you kept your promise, both promises, and she's keeping hers." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything Sophia and Valentina had shared. The trust built in abandoned buildings and blood-soaked safe houses, the understanding that redemption sometimes required destroying yourself to save others. Valentina was facing prosecution, but she was using her knowledge to ensure every trafficking network they'd identified would fall. "How long?" Sophia asked. "Her sentence, I mean." "That depends on many factors," Agent Martinez said diplomatically. "Cooperation, testimony quality, the charges prosecutors decide to pursue. Could be 15 years, could be life." She leaned forward slightly. "What she did, choosing to help you instead of running, it won't erase her past, but it will matter." Sophia understood the subtext. Valentina's redemption would be measured in prison time, her courage reduced to legal calculations. The woman who'd chosen to protect a child and expose her own gang would disappear into the federal system, another casualty of justice's imperfect mathematics. Outside the safe house windows, Sophia could see news vans gathering at the perimeter checkpoint. The viral video had evolved into international headlines. "Girl's kindness brings down trafficking ring. Child witness saves 47 lives. Hurricane survivor becomes unlikely hero." The story they were telling bore only passing resemblance to the truth she'd lived. "The media attention is complicating your protection," Agent Martinez admitted. "Every news outlet wants an interview. There are documentary offers, book deals, speaking engagements. People want to celebrate what you've accomplished. But I can't be celebrated," Sophia said quietly, "because I can't exist." The paradox was cruel but absolute. Sophia's heroism had made her famous, but fame made protection impossible. She would become a symbol while remaining hidden, inspiring others while living in enforced isolation. The girl who'd saved 47 children would spend the rest of her life as someone else entirely. Agent Martinez opened a manila folder, revealing documents Sophia recognized as identity papers, birth certificates, school records, medical history for someone she'd never been. Rebecca Martinez, born in Tucson, Arizona, lost her parents in a car accident, now living with an aunt in suburban Seattle. She looked up. "It's a complete life, clean, safe, normal." Sophia stared at the papers, seeing her future mapped out in bureaucratic precision. Rebecca Martinez would attend high school, maybe college. She'd never speak Spanish in public, never mention Puerto Rico, never acknowledge that she'd once been the daughter of intelligence operatives who died protecting trafficked children. Every conversation, every friendship, every moment of her new life would be built on necessary lies. "When?" Sophia asked. "Tomorrow. We'll fly you to Seattle, introduce you to the agents who'll pose as your family. For the first few months after that, you'll be monitored but independent." Agent Martinez closed the folder. "It won't be easy, but you'll be alive." Sophia nodded, watching the sunset paint the Caribbean in colors that reminded her of everything she was about to lose. She'd chosen compassion over safety and saved 47 lives in return. Tomorrow, Sofia Restrepo would die so Rebecca Martinez could begin living. The price of heroism, she realized, was sometimes the hero herself. 2 years later, Rebecca Martinez sat in a coffee shop near the University of Washington campus. Her laptop opened to an email that made her hands tremble. The sender was anonymous, but the message was unmistakable. Valentina Cruz was granted early parole yesterday. She wanted you to know the children are still safe. Rebecca, she still thought of herself as Sophia sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, closed the laptop carefully. Around her, college students debated assignments and weekend plans with the casual ease of people whose biggest worry was midterm exams. She envied them their normalcy, even as she'd learned to inhabit it. The barista called out names for coffee orders, and Rebecca recognized none of them as hers. Rebecca Martinez had been real for 2 years now, complete with transcripts from a Tucson high school she'd never attended and childhood memories she'd carefully constructed. The federal handlers had been right. It became easier with practice, this business of being someone else. She walked across campus toward her psychology class, noting exits and surveillance cameras from habit. The hypervigilance had never fully faded, though Seattle's tree-lined streets felt worlds away from Puerto Rico's devastated landscape. Sometimes she caught herself scanning crowds for familiar faces, even though everyone she'd once known believed her dead. Professor Chen was discussing trauma responses in children when Rebecca's phone vibrated. A news alert: MS-13 lieutenant testifies in final trafficking case, 200 additional convictions secured. The accompanying photo showed Valentina, older, grayer, but unmistakably the woman who'd shared water and survival with a lost girl beneath hurricane debris. Rebecca's throat tightened. Valentina had kept fighting, even from prison. Every testimony she'd given had dismantled another trafficking network, saved more children whose names would never be known. Redemption measured in anonymous lives preserved. After class, Rebecca walked to the campus memorial garden, a place she came when the weight of her borrowed identity felt overwhelming. She sat on a bench dedicated to those who died protecting others and allowed herself, for just a moment, to remember who she'd been. Sofia Restrepo would have been 15 now. She might have attended university in Puerto Rico, studying her parents' work in intelligence or criminal justice. She might have visited their graves, carried flowers, spoken their names aloud. Instead, she existed only in Rebecca's carefully guarded memories and in news stories that had made her a legend. Rough day? Rebecca looked up to find Marcus, a classmate from her abnormal psychology seminar. He was kind, intelligent, genuinely interested in her thoughts about cognitive behavioral therapy, everything that should have made her want his friendship. Instead, his attention felt like a threat to the careful lies she maintained. "Just thinking about home," she said, which was true in a way that would have destroyed her cover. Marcus sat beside her without invitation. "Arizona, right? You never talk about it much." Rebecca had perfected her backstory through months of practice. Car accident when she was 13, parents killed, moved to live with her aunt in Seattle. Traumatic enough to explain her occasional silences, simple enough to remember under stress. Not much to say, fresh starts are supposed to be fresh. He nodded, accepting her boundaries the way most people did when trauma was mentioned. Rebecca had learned that strategic vulnerability was the best defense, shared just enough pain to satisfy curiosity while deflecting deeper questions. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Agent Martinez, now her emergency contact, checking in every 6 months. The message was brief: "Saw the news about the final convictions. Thought you'd want to know. Your work saved 127 children total. Hope you're well. Am." Rebecca stared at the number. 127 lives. That was the final count of children rescued because she'd chosen compassion over safety in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. The viral video that had destroyed her life had ultimately saved more people than she'd ever imagined possible. "You okay?" Marcus asked, noting her expression. "Yeah," Rebecca said, deleting the message. "Just news from back home." She stood to leave, but Marcus caught her arm gently. "Rebecca, I know we don't know each other that well, but if you ever want to talk about whatever you're carrying around, we're all studying psychology for a reason, right?" The offer was genuine, and Rebecca felt the familiar ache of isolation that came with constant deception. She wanted to tell him everything, about parents who died protecting trafficked children, about sharing water with a bloodied MS-13 enforcer, about making choices that had saved 127 lives while erasing her own identity. She wanted to stop being Rebecca Martinez and remember what it felt like to be truly known. Instead, she smiled the practiced smile she'd perfected. "Thanks." maybe sometime. Walking back to her apartment, Rebecca passed a group of protesters advocating for immigrant children separated from their families. Their signs demanded justice, protection, basic human dignity. She wanted to stop, to tell them that sometimes one person's courage could change everything, that their work mattered more than they knew. But Rebecca Martinez had no standing to speak about such things. Only Sofia Restrepo understood the weight of fighting for strangers' children, and she was gone forever. At home, Rebecca opened her laptop and began typing her psychology paper on post-traumatic growth, how people could emerge stronger from devastating experiences. She wrote about resilience, about finding meaning in suffering, about the possibility of rebuilding identity after profound loss. She was describing her own life while pretending to study others, finding truth through academic distance. Perhaps this was her form of testimony, not in federal courtrooms like Valentina, but in careful analysis of how people survived the unsurvivable. Outside her window, Seattle sparkled with the lights of people living ordinary lives. Rebecca Martinez would join them tomorrow, attending classes and maintaining friendships and pretending her greatest trauma was a car accident that had never happened. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember Sofia Restrepo, the girl who kept impossible promises and paid for heroism with her own existence, the girl who'd proven that sometimes the greatest courage was choosing to disappear so others could live. The children she'd saved would grow up free, never knowing her name. It was enough. It had to be enough. Rebecca saved the document and closed her laptop, but sleep wouldn't come. The number, 127, echoed in her mind like a prayer she'd never learned to say properly. She moved to her small kitchen and made tea with hands that had once typed commands to bring down trafficking networks, now steady enough to pass for normal. 3 years had made Rebecca Martinez real in ways that sometimes frightened her. She had friends now, carefully chosen, strategically maintained, but genuine in their own limited way. She had professors who wrote recommendation letters praising her insight into trauma psychology. She had a life that looked authentic from every angle except the one that mattered most. Her phone rang, displaying the number she'd memorized but never saved. Agent Martinez called exactly twice a year, Sofia's birthday and the anniversary of Hurricane Maria. Today was neither. "Rebecca?" The voice was older, wearier than she remembered. "Is everything okay?" Rebecca asked, reverting instinctively to the alertness that had kept her alive. "Valentina Cruz died yesterday. Heart attack in a halfway house in Phoenix. I thought you should know." Rebecca sat heavily on her couch, the tea forgotten, somewhere between the viral video and the federal courthouse, between shared water and final testimony. Valentina had become the only person who truly knew what Sofia Restrepo had sacrificed. Now that witness was gone too. "She left something," Agent Martinez continued. "A letter. Addressed to you, to Sofia. The facility forwarded it through federal channels. What does it say? I can't read it to you over the phone. But Rebecca, she kept a promise you probably didn't know she'd made." The package arrived 3 days later, forwarded through the same careful channels that had created Rebecca's identity. Inside was a single envelope, Sofia's name written in the familiar handwriting she'd seen on safehouse walls and emergency notes. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Sofia, I know you can't be Sofia anymore, but she's the one who needs to hear this. The children remember, not your name because they never knew it, but they remember that someone fought for them when the whole world had forgotten they existed. I spent 3 years in federal prison telling prosecutors everything I knew, and 6 months in a halfway house learning how to be human again. Yesterday, I met Maria Santos. She was 8 when we saved her from that airstrip. She's 11 now, learning violin, asking her adoptive parents why some people choose to hurt children while others choose to save them. I told her the truth, that doesn't compromise anyone's safety, that sometimes ordinary people do extraordinary things because they believe children deserve to be children. She said she wants to become a social worker when she grows up, to help other kids like her. 127 saved lives are creating their own ripple effects now. The boy rescued from the Ponce warehouse is learning to read again. The girl from the San Juan safe house drew a picture of butterflies for her therapist and said it represents people who help you fly away from bad places. You'll never meet them, never know their names or see their faces, but they exist because you chose compassion over safety in the ruins of a church. Every day they live free is a day your choice echoes forward. I'm dying as someone who found redemption in a girl's kindness. You're living as someone who discovered that true heroism means accepting invisibility as the price of justice. We both learned that love sometimes means letting go of everything you thought you needed. Be Rebecca Martinez. Live the quiet life you've earned. But remember that Sofia Restrepo saved the world in the way that matters most. One child at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of mercy that changed everything. The children are safe. Your parents would be proud. Your sacrifice was worth it. Valentina. Rebecca read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in the box where she kept the few mementos of her former life. A photograph of her parents, a news article about Hurricane Maria's aftermath, a printout of the viral video that had destroyed and transformed her existence. Outside her window, Seattle prepared for another ordinary evening. Rebecca Martinez would join that ordinary world tomorrow, attending classes and writing papers and building a life from the careful architecture of necessary lies. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve. For Valentina, for Sofia Restrepo, for the girl who'd learned that sometimes the greatest acts of love required the complete erasure of self. She made a decision then, one that would define the rest of Rebecca Martinez's life. She would become a trauma counselor, specializing in children who'd survived trafficking. Not to reclaim her past, but to honor it. She would help other survivors rebuild their identities, create new selves from the wreckage of what they'd endured. The work would be her testimony, anonymous but real. Every child she helped heal would be a continuation of that first choice to share water with a stranger. Every family reunited, every nightmare transformed into hope would be Sofia Restrepo's legacy living forward through Rebecca Martinez's hands. She had found her new beginning in the space between who she'd been and who she was becoming. It was enough. More than enough. It was home.